Every night, the dogs of Kaunda howled in front of Mpinda's tavern, as if they were seeing something that no one else could perceive. The villagers murmured, uneasy. Until the day when the truth came out, revealing a secret so disturbing that it would have been better if it had remained buried forever. The village of Kaunda was nestled between two lush hills, bordered by a river that sparkled under the scorching sun. Here, everyone knew everyone. The elders spent their days under the baobab trees, telling stories to the children, while the women sold vegetables and spices at the large market square. The days were marked by the crowing of roosters, the pounding of pestles crushing millet, and the warm greetings exchanged in the red dirt alleyways. But despite this apparent tranquility, one thing troubled the balance of the village: the dogs. Every night, as soon as the moon rose high in the sky, the dogs of Kaunda gathered in front of a small tavern located at the edge of the market. They didn't bark as they did when faced with strangers, nor as when they fought among themselves. No, their howls were long, plaintive, almost funeral. As if they were trying to warn the village of an invisible danger. This tavern belonged to Mpinda, a woman who had arrived in the village 6 years earlier. Few people knew where she came from, and even fewer knew what had brought her to Kaunda. She wasn't particularly talkative, nor overly secretive, but she never shared much about her past. However, one thing was certain: her cooking was exquisite. Her spicy goat stew, slowly cooked in a fragrant sauce, had become famous. Customers came from all over the village and even neighboring hamlets to taste her dish. Every evening, groups of men would sit on the wooden benches in front of the tavern, enjoying their meal under the flickering light of oil lamps. But despite the abundance of customers, one strange detail remained: no dog ever approached the tavern. The village dogs, usually docile, refused to cross the threshold of Mpinda's shop. They would stop dead in front of the door, their fur bristling, growling softly, their tails low. Some even turned around, as if fleeing an invisible danger. At first, the villagers paid no attention. After all, they were just dogs. But over time, whispers began to circulate. Why did these animals refuse to approach Mpinda? Why did their howls grow louder each night? Bobakai, one of the elders of the village, was the first to speak openly about it. The dogs see what we cannot see. His words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with meaning. It wasn't the first time Kaunda had witnessed inexplicable events. The village had its share of stories about mysteries and invisible forces. But this time, the danger seemed much closer, and much more real. Days passed, and the strange behavior of the dogs continued to worry the inhabitants of Kaunda. Every night, at the same time, they gathered in front of Mpinda's tavern, growling, howling, their eyes fixed on the entrance as if they were seeing an invisible presence. Over time, the villagers began to talk about it more and more openly. At first, it was just whispers exchanged softly in the market square. Some said that Mpinda was hiding something, others thought her food was linked to a much darker mystery. It was even said that the dogs had sensed the presence of an evil spirit in the tavern. Then came the first signs that something truly abnormal was happening. One morning, just before dawn, a woman from the village, Aduuma, went to the well to fetch water. As she passed by the tavern, she stopped dead in her tracks. There, on the dusty ground, were footprints, but not human footprints, nor even those of any known animal. They were long, deep, as if something heavy with clawed feet had walked there during the night. Terrified, Aduuma ran to Bobakai's hut. The elder, after inspecting the tracks, slowly nodded and spoke these words. "These are not ordinary footprints. They are the marks of a wandering spirit." This declaration only fueled the villagers' fear. From then on, many hesitated to pass in front of the tavern once night had fallen. Even the most loyal customers ate their meals earlier and returned home before the dogs began howling. Mpinda, for her part, continued to serve her dishes as if nothing was happening. Her face remained impassive, as if she didn't hear the rumors, as if she didn't see the fear growing around her. Her daughter, Awa, seemed even more withdrawn than usual, always standing aside, her eyes lowered, avoiding making eye contact with the customers. One evening, as the tavern was about to close, a young boy from the village, Kojo, dared to approach closer than the others. He was known for his curiosity, and he wanted to understand why the dogs behaved this way. He waited until the last customers had left and, discreetly, he hid behind a tree near the door. There, under the flickering light of the torches, he saw something that chilled him to the bone. Just before entering the tavern, Awa stopped at the threshold, slightly turned her head, and vanished for a moment, as if her body dissolved into the shadows before reappearing. Kojo didn't wait another second. He ran breathlessly through the village, his heart pounding in his chest. When he arrived at Bobakaya's house, he tried to catch his breath and whispered in a trembling voice. She has no shadow. That night, the wind blew strangely over Kaunda. The air was heavy, charged with an invisible tension that everyone felt but couldn't explain. Even the elders, usually peaceful under their baobabs, watched the horizon with concern. The dogs, too, were more agitated than ever. As soon as the sun dipped behind the hills, they gathered in front of Mpinda's tavern, growling, barking, their fur bristling. But this time, something was different. The howling did not stop. It grew louder, more desperate, as if they were trying to prevent some dark force from emerging. The villagers, alerted by this abnormal noise, began to come out of their huts, cautiously approaching the market square. Torches were lit, timidly illuminating the scene. Then, the tavern door suddenly swung open. A deathly silence fell over the gathering. Mpinda stood in the doorway, her face impassive, but her gaze seemed darker than usual. Behind her, her daughter Awa stood upright, motionless. Something about her posture made the onlookers shiver. Her shadow was absent. Bobakai took a few steps forward, his eyes narrowed with a mix of wisdom and fear. He studied the young girl for a long moment before taking a deep breath. "It's time you tell us the truth, Mpinda." A long silence followed. Then, slowly, Mpinda placed her hands on her daughter's shoulders. Her voice, usually calm and composed, trembled slightly when she finally spoke. "I never wanted to deceive you. But I couldn't lose her." Whispers spread among the villagers. Some stepped back, others huddled together. Bobakai, however, did not move. "Lose what?" he asked in a grave tone. Mpinda's eyes clouded with restrained tears. She took a deep breath before announcing in a broken voice, "Awa no longer belongs to this world." A shiver ran through the crowd. Several instinctive steps back could be heard. The dogs, too, began to growl again, even more wild than before. Then, before the astonished eyes of the villagers, Awa took a step forward, and her body seemed to waver, like a mirage under a scorching heat. Her features seemed to momentarily distort, as if she were both here and elsewhere. A scream rose from the spectators, followed by another. Some began to pray, others clung to their neighbors' arms, terrified. But one thought dominated everyone's mind. Awa was not like other children. A heavy silence fell over the market square. The torches flickered in the night wind, casting trembling shadows over the tense faces of the villagers. All eyes were fixed on Awa, this young girl who stood there, motionless, with a body that seemed to belong to another world. Mpinda lowered her head, as if the weight of the secret she had carried for so long had finally become too heavy. She took a deep breath before lifting her eyes, facing the crowd with a look filled with pain. Awa died 6 years ago. The murmurs grew louder, some stepped back, others pulled their boo-boos tighter around themselves, seeking comfort in this frightening revelation. Boubacar remained impassive, but his features stiffened slightly. And yet, she is standing before us. Pinda nodded. When the illness took her, I begged the ancient spirits to return her to me. I prayed under the sacred tree, made offerings, and in the night, they answered. Awa came back, but she was never truly the same again. Her gaze fell upon her daughter. Awa, silent, seemed absent, her eyes fixed on some distant point. She doesn't eat. She doesn't sleep. She hardly ever speaks. Only the dogs have seen the truth from the start. A long shiver ran through the crowd. Some elders nodded, murmuring prayers. The dogs, however, had begun to retreat, as if, now that the secret had been revealed, Awa's presence was even more unbearable. Boubacar stepped forward, scrutinizing the young girl with intensity. And now, he asked in a grave voice. Pinda closed her eyes for a moment, then exhaled in a whisper. They have come to take her. At that precise moment, a chilling breeze swept through the square, causing the flames of the torches to flicker. A deep rumble echoed in the night, and Awa, still standing in the doorway of the tavern, gave a faint smile, before her body began to slowly fade. A cold gust swept across the square, making the torches waver and raising a cloud of dust. The villagers, frozen, watched in terror as Awa slowly disappeared, as if the wind was carrying her away piece by piece. Her smile lingered for a few more moments, suspended between this world and the next, before vanishing into the darkness. Pinda collapsed to her knees, her trembling hands, her gaze lost in the emptiness where her daughter had stood just moments before. A heavy silence settled over the place, only disturbed by the soft whimpering of the dogs, now calm, as if they understood that the threat had finally dissipated. Boubacar approached Pinda, placed a compassionate hand on her shoulder, and whispered. One must learn to let go of those who no longer belong to this world. Despite their fear and doubts, the villagers felt a strange peace settle around them. The air, once heavy and oppressive, seemed lighter now. The dogs wandered off, one by one, returning to their homes without another sound. At dawn, Pinda left the village, alone, without baggage, without a word. No one tried to stop her. Some said she went into the sacred forest, others said she wandered from village to village, seeking a peace she might never find. But one thing was certain, the dogs of Kaunda never howled again at night. The village elders still tell this story to the children, a lesson passed down from generation to generation. Never defy the order of things. What returns from the spirit world will never be as it once was. And sometimes, on full moon nights, some swear they see a fleeting shadow near the abandoned tavern, and feel a cold breeze brush against their skin.